Okay, good afternoon from here, or good morning to the Americans, or good evening to Yanaka-san and everybody who is on the other side. It's really nice to have you here for the afternoon session. Unfortunately, everything is still virtual. We're sitting here with headsets and everything instead of actually meeting in person, but that will happen soon, I hope. The program for today is relatively straightforward. I will make a brief introduction, a bit about rate management and where we stand, and a few subjects that we already discussed before. Then I will introduce Christian and hand over to him to share some of his experiences and some of his views on rate management, and we will have an interactive Q&A afterwards. So if you have any questions or if anything comes to your mind, just type it into this comment section that you have on the right, and we will just pick it up from there. So feel free to do that, or there is also a button where you can ask for the microphone. Then I can at the end of the session hand you the microphone, and you can ask your question directly as you like. We want to have that as interactive as possible. So whenever anybody has something to add, just feel free to. Then afterwards, we have a quick virtual cocktail hour. The system here provides us with an option where it actually matches us up with each other for 5 minutes, so we can talk a bit on the subject or on other topics. So yeah, let's get started. I mean, rates and space are no doubt key issues of our time. It remains a movable feast. Rates on most trade lanes change frequently nowadays, and the full vessel situation and the lack of equipment make it a really key topic for us, especially now as we are going towards the end of the pandemic and the demand everywhere is huge. So to manage commitments and space allocations while offering speed is also more and more important for the customer, how fast we can actually come up with a solution. So we need some software to support that. And we have also talked about rate management during our executive development program that we ran in the first quarter with the 3 classes. And it was always one of the case studies that was the most interesting, where people really said this is a key concern for them in the organization. This is something they're working on to improve. We looked at a few solutions that some people already had implemented, and that really is an area that matters. And we also published a paper on it, a bit of a white paper last year in January again. And we will actually update that a bit with the findings of today of these sessions and some of the very interesting insights that Christian has for us in order to have a bit of a guideline for the subject, which is overall certainly in most organizations still very important at the moment today. It's I always call it a bit the rate kitchen, the kind of center place where we put everything together that we get from vendors, carriers, overseas partners. In the past, things were, of course, very easy. The guy selling was the guy buying. And if you do everything alone, it was always initiated by an inquiry from the customer. You go out, you get all your resources together, you cook up your offering, you make your offer. In an omni-channel future where you actually offer through a multitude of channels, not only through your salespeople, where customers want to have their reply very fast, where they need their offers immediately, where you're competing with digital offerings and so on. We need to get a lot faster. And so this rate kitchen is very important for how we serve, not only on the efficiency side, for our own efficiency, how much does it cost me to make an offering, how much is my sales cost, and offering is part of that, or how do I manage my margins, and so on and so on. So we need software support for that. And so a lot of people are using different systems. Some just have an online depository where they have a lot of Excel sheets with the tariffs and where everybody can serve themselves. Some are still working on a case-by-case basis, depends a bit on the market. And some are more advanced and already have rate management systems that are fed by APIs from some of their vendors. On others, they put things in. So we look a bit deeper into that. And I would actually not talk too much about it because we have Christian here, who is an expert on the field. I might let me quickly introduce him. Christian's background is that he started in the carrier in Maersk, where he was also heading tender management, where he was working as a strategic sourcing manager, so on the buying side of things. He then went on to be sales director at Intra, which, of course, in terms of data and in terms of rate structures and things like that, was already a very important field early on. So he had a lot of contact there. And then, of course, in Panalpina on the customer side, again, how to build solutions for clients, how to manage tenders and so on. So already involved in this subject as well. And now for the past 5 years, he has been running sales at Portrix, which I always call it the Mercedes of rate management systems. There's a lot of them, and we don't want to make too much advertisement today, but it's really a bit about what matters in rate management, what doesn't, where are the difficulties, where are the challenges, where was the past, where will the future be going, and I think we have a few very interesting insights there. Portrix is now part of Descartes, so only just since 2 weeks now, I think. Huh? So Christian...
1 week.
1 week, okay. So Christian got a huge pay rise. That's why he's smiling so much. And other than that, I leave it to him to explain a bit more on the subject. Okay, Christian, over to you. Thank you.
Perfect. Then let me share quickly. You should be able to see my screen now.
Yes.
Good. So thanks everyone for taking the time and letting me talk a little bit about rate and capacity management, 2 areas that I'm quite passionate about and have had the pleasure of dealing with for a couple of years. I will today for the next roughly half hour talk a little bit about the history of it. And the reason I find the history important is because you'll notice that things are accelerating. I think that's something that all of you can see in your day-to-day life, but it's really to show things started quietly and now the ball is really rolling, and that leads into at least how do I see the future. So this is not, let's say, how things necessarily will be, but just based on my discussions with other freight forwarders, with carriers, with larger BCOs, where do I see that the future in these 2 areas is looking like going? And then Ruben had also asked me to share some of the learnings that I have gathered over the years from dealing with freight forwarders who have kind of gone into the rate, the capacity side, also on the digital part. And then at the end, happy to take any questions that you might have that I hopefully will be able to provide some good answers to. So when it comes to rate and capacity management, if we think back about 20 years, most of you remember this as a more quiet time. Contracts were typically managed in manual formats, could be Excel and emails, but could also be PDFs and faxes. And the rates were fairly stable. So you had the conferences, especially in the early part of the 2000s, that meant that there would be an announcement that in the following quarter a certain GRI would be implemented. The number of surcharges was fairly low. And overall, it was not easy to be a freight forwarder, but you had a good understanding of this is what I'm buying and this is what I can sell, and I can sell that for a period of time until the next GRIs would come in. Then typically the game was banking on whether a GRI would hold or how quickly it would fall, and that type. What we started to see in the 2000s was then that the forwarders, which were very scattered, especially in the beginning of the period, started to slowly consolidate. So some of the larger players, let's say, acquired some of the smaller mid-sized guys, and they started to gain more and more power towards the carriers as they controlled larger and larger volumes. Capacity overall was not a major problem except in peak season. So you had these very typical peak periods. And therefore, there was not much in terms of capacity management systems that were really out in the market, because during slack season, it was fairly easy. You could get your cargo on board. You would seek out the lowest rates. And in peak season, there was some firefighting for some weeks, maybe a month or 2, and otherwise off you would go. During this period, the first rate management system started to see the light of day. That was, for instance, Metaship, Catapult, Cargosphere, and then a little bit later on came GT Nexus, because some of the, especially larger freight forwarders, as they grew in size, realized we need to manage what we're buying. We need to keep better track of it because it's starting to become quite large. But those rate systems were used very much as siloed products. So really, you had a system that you stored data in, but it was not integrated, and it was, you went in there, you looked it up, and then you would go on and quote to the customer, or let's say create your bookings in your system. Then in the 2000 or early 2010s, things started to change more frequently. So the carriers were seeing, okay, contracts can change. The conferences were no longer there. Carriers changed the rates. They started to add more surcharges, especially as a way to compensate for reductions on the freight itself. New surcharges would come up or be implemented as soon as possible. But most of the data that you were receiving from the carriers was still these manual formats. The forwarder consolidation continued, so the larger players continued to grow, and there was I call it a tug of war with the carriers about with the couldn't really get around the forwarders, and this kind of thing back and forth was happening, and there was quite a lot of carriers to play out against each other. That did mean that for some, capacity became a bigger and bigger topic because the larger volumes were moved, needed to be carefully allocated to the carriers where you had the partnerships, and the carriers were demanding more support throughout the whole year in order to grant that capacity, especially in peak season. But at least from what I have experienced, then we started to see a focus on rate systems. So it shifted more away from the silo approach into integrating, especially into the TMS systems. This was very much linked to increasing the productivity of staff, but also managing the margin better so that you were not, let's say, only buying well, but you were actually also using what you were buying well in your executing of shipment. So a lot of forwarders started to say, okay, I actually need this data not just in a standalone system, but I need it in other systems, my TMS, or potentially also for linking to my quotations towards customers so that I can see what have I quoted. I can give my sales access to the buying rates, and then I can keep track of everything they have done so that nothing exists outside of my system landscape. As the 2010s gained steam, so did the changes, and by the mid and end part, you really started to see rates changing much more frequently, up to multiple times a week or a month. A part of that was also driven by the carrier consolidation. So the carriers started to buy each other, they started to consolidate, and the number of available carriers started to reduce greatly, down to today you have basically maybe 8 larger carriers and a number of niche players to deal with. That also led to capacity issues because the carriers started also to understand they could take out strings, they could take out vessels, they could do certain things in order to boost rates and to basically limit the capacity that was available to you. So now it was really a need to start implementing these what I call systematic solutions. So either a system or some kind of much more, let's say, stringent process to manage this part, because it was no longer just, oh, I have a good rate, I'll book on it. Now I really had to make sure that even if I didn't have the best rate with a carrier, I needed to make sure that my business was moving with them because I might need them at a different point of the year. The same time, as the let's say the world was becoming more and more integrated, we saw the rise of the digital forwarder and the introduction of the first online rate tools by the, let's say, 2016-17s, and then that has only started to accelerate more and more. But especially when Flexport had their large investment, a lot of people saw, okay, this digital forwarding is at least a hot topic for investors and also an area that we need to start taking more and more serious. That meant that rate tools became even more important, and there was a need when you go digital that you also start to have a digital process for getting data into your tool. So there were more focus on the carriers being able to share information electronically, it could be contracts and surcharges, and more push for the rate tools to be able to handle that and then feed that data to digital front ends, to TMSs and quotation systems, and basically anything that you can think of. We also saw the benchmarking tools and indices to really start to become prominent, leading to much more transparency in the industry than we had ever been used to before. And that, of course, was something that only fueled the changing of rates overall, because as soon as something happened, more people will be aware, and that would either push the rates down typically at that point in time or potentially up. So now we're in the 2020s, only the early part, but things have changed even more. And now we're seeing the spot rate part becoming the norm. So Maersk Spot was the first part on the market, leading to daily changes, hourly changes of rates. But for the past, especially 6 months, almost all the larger carriers that are left have come out with some kind of spot solution, whether it's CMA, it's Evergreen, it's Costco, it's OOCL. They're all coming around with this spot concept. And they have also started to really limit capacity, which I'm sure is something all of you are facing issues with today. And they have found a way to do that and also manage the equipment to boost up the rates to these incredible levels that we have today. And that has led that capacity is almost today more important than the actual rate, because it doesn't matter if you buy cheaply, if you physically cannot move the cargo, it doesn't help you. That has also meant that digital integration has become vital, because information is now not, let's say, shared weekly or monthly. It is daily or hourly. Capacity is something that changes very frequently. So you need to integrate, because humans cannot process this data as quickly as systems. So a lot of companies are looking to what I call a digital concept, where you don't just integrate into a TMS, but you integrate to digital, to CRMs, to BI tools, financial ERPs, basically as much as you can come across. And here the rate is a key component, because it's something that plays a part in most of what you do, being the middleman. We, or at least now I should say, we, maybe more myself, carrier consolidation has almost maxed out. And it has led that it's very, very difficult to avoid working with any of the top 10 carriers if you're a large or even size freight forwarder. And of course, as they push towards these capacity things, it's almost impossible to go anywhere else, because you have to deal with any of these guys. We have then also seen that this has led to a number of forwarders are looking much more aggressively into additional revenue streams to keep the margins. So rate management for pre and on carriage has become much more important. Rate management on the demurrage and detention, making sure that you upsell as much value-added services as you can, is now vital, because the transparency created by the benchmarks and the indices, the spot rates, has meant that making money on the freight rate itself is more challenging than it has ever been. Now, that's where I think most of you, the world that most of you are living today. But there's, of course, a future, and these are just my personal thoughts, right? I may be right on some of them, I may be wrong, but just from dealing with forwarders, carriers, and BCOs, kind of where I think things are heading. And the first part that I see is that I believe on the carrier side, we're moving towards what I call the airline model, where carriers will eventually price based on a per vessel basis, because the vessel is their largest cost, and if it is full, or almost full, why not charge an enormous premium, because there's not so many other, let's say, parties you can go on. Similar that there are certain airlines that sit on certain particular airport to airport lanes, and they are moving therefore towards spot becoming the key rate in the market, because it's something they can manage probably eventually down to like on a minute by minute basis that you're used to if you look at an airline ticket in the morning, and in the afternoon it has drastically changed. I still believe there will be some discounts to larger players or to those who support a lot, as well as larger named account deals that can change kind of where the market is. But the spot segment is, at least what I see, will eventually become the prominent one for all the carriers once they get their feet wet in the spot market, they understand, and they build the right technology behind it to really do this dynamic modeling. Capacity and equipment will continue to be an issue. The carriers found gold at the end of the rainbow, and they want to keep it. So they have now found out that if they take out capacity, if they limit it, they just make a lot more money on the vessels that they have, and it's cheaper to have them lying. And equipment is a core component of that as well. And again, with less carriers, and I believe there will be a little bit more consolidation coming, this is becoming easier for them to manage, because they don't have to watch out for 20 players, but maybe in a couple of years only for 6 that actually matter. I also believe that the carriers will therefore start to launch more products that are linked directly to their equipment and allocation availability, so that instead of you getting a price that you have no idea whether you will actually be able to let's say, physically move on, the carriers will link the price very closely to their available equipment and the allocation that you might be buying potentially upfront from them. I also believe that the carriers will continue to integrate more logistics services, again, a little bit the Maersk model, to provide this end-to-end offering to customers. They now have more money, and they will, for the foreseeable future, make a lot more money. And as they don't want to invest that in vessels, where do they put it? They probably invest it into road solutions, custom solutions, and this type of thing, because the money has to go somewhere. So my belief is that a lot of them will go back to the strategy that was prevalent in the 80s with all the logistics companies of the carriers, and they will just, instead of building that as separate companies, they will build it as an in-house integrator. Now, what does that mean for freight forwarders? The procurement model will change. You really have to think about, how do I want to act in this market, and how will I create new business models from this to make sure that I can act in spot environment. I'm not saying at all that freight forwarders will go out of business. I think, on the contrary, I think there's still much good business to be done for many, many years. But the game is changing, and you therefore have to think about, how am I going to change along with that, and be willing to explore a new business model and really think, how do I take advantage of the new normal? That means, in my opinion, that digital will be key, as productivity will make or break the middleman. You need to be able to do more with the same amount of people. And here I use the term, beware of the startup bingo. So I've dealt with a lot of forwarders who have started maybe 50 projects where they are looking into any kind of startup in any kind of industry or any kind of logistics related industry, to see what they're doing, what could they benefit from, and so. And I don't personally believe in that. I believe you have to think about, how do you want to, let's say, be as a company, find the right partners, 2, 3, 4 startups, and then focus heavily on that. And maybe 1 or 2 of them turn out not to be the right partner, but you need to go somewhere. And instead of doing, let's say, the whole board, select a few and go from there. And that's going digital is a big step, but you can also go too far and do too much. The other part is that COVID has changed, especially business travel, and this mantra that I at least grew up with, that forwarding is a people business. So it's not that business travel will be extinct, but we will meet each other less. And that means that people will be more comfortable, especially after COVID, to do business digitally. And Generation X and C will continue to take up key positions, and therefore also start to say, well, I'm used to doing everything, let's say, on an app or electronically, so I'm okay if I only meet my provider once every 6 or 12 months, and the rest of the time I deal with a website or some kind of other service where I get all my information when I want it. Now, going digital also means that AI and machine learning will take on a bigger role. So here I really think about automating certain business processes that you have that can be handled by more machine type setups, and especially around the price setting. And you need to become more adept at doing dynamic price setting. So I'm not talking about any procurement manager on the call or anything that your job is going obsolete, but things are going to move so fast that as a human you will not be able to let's say, factor everything in and set the prices quick enough. But what you will have is knowledge and experience, and so that can feed into these data models as a component, and therefore put you in a position to respond much quicker, much better to the market changes than potentially others that are not using this kind of tool. And that leads to finally that forwarders will again have to become a bit more tech savvy. So years ago, forwarders were quite heavy on technology and loved building things themselves. Then there came a bit of a change in the industry, and it went from let's buy it rather than build it. I, of course, work for a tech company, so I'm not advocating that everybody now build themselves. What I more mean is that you need to make sure you excel in whatever niche that you play in. So whatever you see as your core strength, focus on that and make sure that you can deliver either with a partner or on your own the technology that can drive that niche to position you there. And then also make sure that you have enough tech resources to be able to adapt quickly to the changing market dynamics. So if spot truly in 12 months is the prevalent way of rates being transmitted from the carriers. What are you going to do? And having no IT resources to support that, and you saying, well, that's going to be project number 18, is probably not going to cut it. So more tech within your company to make sure that you can respond quicker and more agile to these changes, and also so you can keep, let's say, benefiting from all the tools that are being developed out there and integrating them into your service offering. So on that note, what I also wanted to share is something that I've looked at a lot, and it's something that at least a number of freight forwarders have come to me and talked about, which is creating a digital ecosystem. Because going digital is many things. It is not just a rate system that integrates into one place, but it's really thinking holistically about what are all the different processes that I can digitalize. And one is, for instance, to say I need to go on the digital forwarding. I need to, let's say, be able to offer my customers an online solution where they can search for rates, they can make bookings, they can get KPI reports. On the other hand, I also need to speed up how I handle all these tenders that I get from the customers, especially when they come in from tender tools, or I need to tender to the carriers, whatever it is. I need to get my hands on benchmarking information so that I am aware of what's happening in the market, and I can feed that potentially into my AI machine learning models to make sure that I respond almost minute by minute about what's going on. A lot of shippers are becoming more and more focused again on the environment. So can I take in carbon emission information to make sure that I know the best ways of moving cargo, using that as a way to both, let's say, help the environment, but also help my customers and have a different solution to offer them. I can take in scheduling data so that I know all the different changes when loops are taken out, when information is changing for what I thought it was. Closely integrating with the carriers. This could be for a number of processes, let's say bookings and SIs. A lot of you are probably already doing electronically, but it could also be spot rate APIs, carrier rates. It could be other types of details for allocations, capacity that you could integrate with them. Integrate closely with your TMS so that every process that's possible to be done automated is done automated, and not, let's say, any kind of dual or triple entry is avoided. And also integrate into your CRM, and your quoting process so that you capture all your data, you capture any leads that come in, and your CRM system also feeds into your potential dynamic pricing model to understand what have I just sold to this customer, what would that mean for the next customer coming along, can I reuse a rate without having to go out and potentially ask for it again, all these type of things. So these are some of the areas that I see forwarders that are thinking, let's say, not in silos, but really holistically about digitalization. They are touching upon all these areas, and there are more. This is just, let's say, what I come across mostly. And some of the companies that I've listed here are the ones that, at least I would say, most of the customers I deal with today have highlighted as being, let's say, amongst the best in class. So on to a few learnings. So part of it when you deal with rate and capacity management, and also the digital side, which for me is now closely associated with rates, is speed is key. It does not matter what you do, but do something in order to learn. I have seen a number of forwarders that have said, we know we need to improve this area. And they've said that years ago. And today they have still not made a decision because organizationally they might not be ready. They are not sure about the budget. They're not sure they're making the right decision. They have to go through more RFPs. And I understand all that. But in all that time, especially back to what I was trying to explain with the history, things are changing so quickly that if you start a process today and you base it on certain data and you only make a decision in 18 months, the basis of your decision has changed. The market has moved. The environment has moved. New technology has come about that you might not have looked at. So it's better to do something, learn from it, and similarly to a lot of the IT companies in the world, be ready to pivot. So if you start in an area and you figure out this doesn't work, then don't be afraid to go, let's say, and change it. Again, there's many examples of this in in the industry of startups who started one way in 2016, then they pivoted in 18, they pivoted again in 20, and now they're successful. That's also okay. But if you don't do anything, you don't learn. I cannot say this strongly enough. Don't think in silos. You need to think big and across the functions to get it right. The world is digitalizing, and digitalizing cannot happen in silos, because if you buy 6 different systems, then they all need to talk together. And if they can't, then you probably in 1 or 2 years have to go back to the drawing board. So think about where do you want to go as a business holistically, and then look for either partners or building for yourself that can meet that. So one component is, for instance, capacity management is quite important, but do you want the rates as part of that? Do you need that integrated into your TMS? Do you want to offer, let's say, capacity directly on your digital front end? Do you want to closely provide data to the carriers about what you plan to book with them out of that system? So I'm not saying you have to do all this, but these are thoughts that should be taken, because if you're going that direction, you need to make sure that you can do that. How do you want to differentiate? So what I mean here is find that niche that you have, and make sure that the system landscape, could be rates or capacity or so, fits that to position yourself in that new world. So if there's a certain industry you want to really, or a certain part of the industry that you really want to play in, then make sure that you do everything in your power to position yourself as strongly as possible there, and make sure that the system landscape matches that. That leads to this again. I hear from a lot of companies today that then they say, well, I have 3 other projects, so I'm not going to be able to do that until the end of the year. Then the business, or let's say the world again, has changed. So the forwarders that I meet that really do the best, they are able to adapt very, very quickly and say, okay, this is the project we do, and then we simply put the resources, or we have the resources available to pull that off. So tech resources will become more important, because if you want to take advantage of some new tech, you probably need to integrate it. You probably need to train people. You probably need to set it up. And yeah, at least what I see, the biggest struggle in forwarders today is this. Yeah, I don't have enough technical resources to help that. So these projects will be postponed. Control what you can control. So capacity management is really in an uncharted territory today, right? None of us had probably expected what is going on at the moment. But from what you negotiate, from what you have available, you need to be on top of that. You need to have some kind of systematic approach to dealing with it. It cannot be left up to the discretion of local people, or nobody having a clear overview of who's doing what with what we have agreed. So you need to take full control of what you have, and then there will be 10, 20, 30% that is out of your control, but at least the 60, 70, 80 part, you know what you're doing, you know how to improve. You can prove to the carriers that you're a good partner, and that you're let's say, keeping up your end of the bargain. So if you're dealing with a lot of this manually, I would urge to say, look at how you can do this better, because the companies I've dealt with that have gone to the systematic approach, they have fared better in these times than others, in fairness. I would also say, and this is the startup bingo thing again, test new products with care. There are so many startups coming every month, new ones, and there's a lot of venture capital money coming in, but don't test 50 new solutions at once. Be very selective. Again, I know I said in the beginning that speed is key, but speed is key on the things that you really believe in and that you really think fits your business model. So if you want to be strong in, let's say, on the dynamic pricing side, then find a company that can do that there. Invest the time, the resources, whatever it is, in doing it. And if it doesn't work, then, as I said earlier, then pivot. That is okay. So I have met companies that have done the 50 new solutions and have eventually ended up doing nothing because they never conclude on anything. And the better ones I have seen are the ones that have selected only 2 and have basically turned down everybody else and said, no, for the next 12 months, these are the 2 and we bank on them. If it works out, great. If one of them works out, also great. And otherwise, afterwards, we start with the next 2 or 3. And then the final one is build versus buy. So over the years, I've come across the build versus buy discussion in many shapes and forms. And you can build yourself. What I would suggest is those companies that I've seen that are most successful, they build the part that is core to what they do. So if there is something on, I don't know, a certain, could be refrigerated goods or whatever it is that they really are strong in, then they build the components there and focus on that, and everything else they kind of buy in from the market. If you just build yourself because that's what you want to do, I would say most probably run into the struggle that then tech-wise, you're simply not able to follow the market. You're not able to have enough resources, and a lot of projects stall or get canceled. So build a part that is core to you, and then buy everything in, also so that you can be very agile in your approach, that if something else comes along or the market takes a 180 turn, that you can react to it. So again, build versus buy is for me back on the table as realistic, but I would say the learnings I've had is that only build the part that is core. Everything else, there are companies that are doing nothing but that, and let them gather intel from the market, let them see what's out there, and then benefit from that knowledge. So that was a little bit what I had prepared, also to leave time open for the Q&A. So I think I'll open it back up, Ruben, for you.
Yes, of course. Thank you very much, Christian. I mean, it's always a hassle talking to the screen the whole time. But really some great insights there. I was already impressed this morning, and the second round even better than the first, especially the learnings I still like a lot. I really like to pick up this build or buy thing, because it's a discussion we often have. A lot of people are used to building it internally, spend a lot of time on it. And whenever we discuss this topic with some members, it ends up in the same story. What's your focus? What you're good at? Are you good in solving problems in terms of transportation for your customers, or are you good in building systems? Because if you'd be good in building systems, that would be your core business, right? So it's always a bit a balance. On the one hand, you want to have control, and that's something everybody understands. On the other hand, you cannot always have the best ideas all by yourself. So doing it with partners and curating more or less your kind of own environment might be the best solution. Yeah. Still. Okay, guys. Any questions? Please shoot. I of course have a lot, but better it comes from you than it always comes from me. You can just press the request mic button, or you can go type it in the comments field, whatever you prefer. Okay, well, you make your minds up. I'm asking one more because I'm very, I like this airline model that, here we have money, sorry. Just first, I like this airline model because the idea is interesting to compare it to what the airlines are doing. So if we say FAK is disappearing, Christian, and we only have spot, then the equivalent to a BSA would be to say, okay, I buy capacity on certain lanes, on certain sailings for a certain period of time, and then I'm doing my own dynamic pricing based on that asset that I buy there, or how would that work?
I agree. I think maybe not clearly enough said that, because carriers will focus this way. I think one of the ways of order will be forced to act in the future is to exactly do that BSA part, where you go in and say, I'm going to literally buy 500 containers on your vessel. You guarantee me the space, but also the equipment. And I then start selling that. And as I get closer to the sailing, my price will probably also change based on algorithms and whatnot, because I will say the first 100 that buys of my BSA slot, they get a good price. And then as the space on that becomes less and less, and as the market dynamics are changing and whatnot, the price is then adapted. And the final 5 slots is maybe sold at a much higher price, similar to how it is booking with an airline.
Okay. Yeah. I pick up here from Moanise. Of course, you scared everybody by saying that the forwarders will get a difficult time. That for sure. I think it's clear that this kind of buying for 100 and selling for 110 will not work anymore. Huh? So a certain dynamic will have to come in there.
Yeah.
Huh? How do you see that?
Well, I don't see the forwarders going away, but I do see that the forwarder will have to adapt to how things are going, because how I grew up was also you sold, let's say you sold on the freight. That was where you made most of your money, and you tried to make things around that. And I think that part will become more difficult with the spot market. Now, what we just talked about is this BSA concept. That could potentially become one way that you can adapt to it. It can be that you can offer different services that the carriers will simply not be able to, because their focus will remain on the vessels. So it's not that the forwarders are going away, but there will be some changes needed in how you how you act. I don't have the solutions for that. Then I would probably start up my own business. But I definitely don't see it going away. But changes are coming.
Okay. Let me pick one from Hans here. How do you see the constantly changing spot market tie in with automated price setting? I mean, you mentioned quickly that there will be AI playing a role because humans can't manage rates anymore. I think we had that discussion before when we talked about marketplaces and said, I cannot compare my rate to the other rates manually every hour, every minute to make sure I'm on page one of the search. How will that play in?
Yeah, no, it'll become similar to what you're used to from e-commerce, right? That the data will need to feed from the ones with the space into your dynamic price setting. You will need to feed that with potentially other outside, let's say, sources that you have. Could be economic factors, could be your own knowledge, whatever it is that you put in there, and you come up and maybe you're able to, in essence, predict the market or beat the market, because things are then based on systems and you have maybe a good feel for how that's going. But this is for us in what I do, one of the most interesting areas, and we don't have the solutions. We just see that things will, with the spot market, change so quickly and so frequently that a human will not be able to react, and therefore the dynamic pricing will have to play a part. But I would also really do it back to the BSA comment. Then you have to do the same, right? Towards your customers, you probably have to say, I don't have one price, but I have a price that can change because I have to react.
And if you want to have a commitment, you need to make a commitment. Huh? So we come back to these kind of choices. You have two ways to go. Huh? You can have the commitment and take the risk. Yep. Or have the thing. But I mean, in this whole dynamic situation, you have the added factor of the equipment. Huh? I mean, in travel, in air, you don't have the equipment issue because you don't need to care about it. Huh? And in our world, you have that on top, and you might have on top a customer requirement on a maximum kind of a CO2 utilization for this kind of transport, a maximum kind of transit time. So you have a wide variety of options, and you then have to filter through those and optimize the rate for those, right? Okay, good. We have Neil, whether there will be some regulation coming into play in the market. That's not rate guessing. That's more hoping.
I think my hope would be one day it would, because it would help. But that goes beyond my pay grade on what will happen on EU and government level. But I think it would be good for everybody at the moment if something like that would come into play. Well, maybe not the carriers, but at least our side of business.
You see the situation continuing like this, to pick up Suresh here?
Personally, also? I do. Knowing people at the carriers, and again, business is very, very good. They've had some lean years. There's some very, very happy faces. They have found something, and they are going to try and milk that for as long as they can. I don't know when it will end. It will probably end dramatically at one point in time. But I don't underestimate that there's only a few carriers, and there's only a few that matters. And if these guys keep in line, it doesn't really matter what let's say a PIL or some of these guys do, because they can't take the volume anyway.
Yeah. It's a crazy situation. They have discovered the importance of price in this price volume and allocation metrics. Huh? So let's see whether it's just at the moment you have prices which kill quite a few commodities. So we will see whether the demand will have an impact there at some stage. Huh? Okay, Neil just rephrased his question on the conference types, whether the old-fashioned FEFC kind of regulation. Yeah, I mean, we still at the moment, liner shipping is always under review by the European Union and by other bodies. So they will, of course, involve at some stage when things go too crazy. But at the moment, carriers have 3 great quarters. We'll see. They will have a 4th and a 5th. At some stage, the party might be over. It's whether they can keep that discipline or not.
Yeah, and I think also the moment that it impacts, because a lot of BCOs are, of course, also complaining, because ultimately the forwarders, of course, have a problem, but the BCOs typically also have to pay for it. If eventually business patterns start to change, or companies start to move production in certain places, that's when I think the EU part will start to step in, because then they'll say, okay, hey, this does not work. We cannot have $15,000 for a container of T-shirts, because then things are just not going to be produced or moved that way. Then I think it will come in, but it will take another year minimum of this before they will start to get involved.
Okay, coming back to the rate management subject. In terms of timeline, I mean, you had it. You saw your time in Intra. I was back in CargoSmart at some stage. A lot of things were digitally possible for a long time, but they haven't moved forward. I mean, in 2014, we probably would have said things will turn very fast. They haven't turned fast. And also today, even in most rate management systems, a lot of the input doesn't happen digitally. It happens manually in some back office where people handish put in rates. And how do you see that progressing? What's the timeline for this, that we really will advance to, let's say, a kind of Maersk spot level for most carriers? Because a lot of them today, they have a rate lookup on a website. They are not yet digital rates that they push digitally to their customers, or that can be handled in that way.
No, so if you had asked me a year ago or 2 years ago, I would probably have said this will take a long time, because the carriers system-wise and technology-wise were very far behind. But what I have seen, especially the last year, and Evergreen with the partnership that they have done with BlueX is a good example of this, is a number of the carriers have started to outsource tech to, let's say, independent software companies that are much more agile, much more quick, and develop much faster than the carriers could ever do themselves. So again, Evergreen's spot solution, which will soon be Yangming's spot solution, which will probably soon be Carrier 3's spot solution. It's not perfect today, but that company can move much, much quicker than those could ever do. So in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, they will be further ahead with much more dynamic price models, much more of all this. And again, OOCL has come out with their FreightSmart solution, which is also developed a bit out of the house. Maersk has partnered up with certain outside companies for all this. And I think when the carrier took that choice, they will respond much, much quicker. So my personal belief is that when we sit here 1st of January 2023, a huge step will have taken, because give these companies 18 months, they will have moved mountains compared to what they did for the past 10 years.
Especially as there is a lot of money around now. I mean, they even have that on top. They don't need to think to do A or B. They can do both and still have some money in the pocket. Interesting. Okay. Any more questions? Shoot now. Is your chance. Let me check my list, because I have noted a lot of questions now. I'm still a lot intrigued by your learnings. That's for me still the most exciting part of the presentation. Why do I have that here? What do you think about standards? Will they come up at some stage, or will we just, based on, let's say, there being 4 or 5 white label solutions like BlueX or so, come to a de facto standard, because there will only be 3, 4 around, and they will be having an easy mapping to each other, and we will have a standardized format? Or is there, because they still, every carrier has their own kind of rate structure, right?
That's a good question. I think in terms of standards, I don't think the carriers will move towards a standard, because it's so deeply ingrained in them. I also think when it comes to how they will be selling, I think they will start to develop more solution that will fit more niche markets. So I think here in the beginning, you will have, let's say, a select number of solutions that customers can buy from the carriers. And in a couple of years, you'll probably have, okay, if you're dealing with SRM, it's a different type of solution. If you're dealing with reefers, it's a different one that they really try and then specialize. But whether they will, on the underlying rate side than standard, I don't think so. I think they want to be too independent on that.
Okay. But I mean, if you say they only spot, then there is, let's say, fixed commitment. It's relatively simple because spot can be just one number for that day, for that sailing, and that's it. Huh? And it has all parts in there, but it's maybe not simple enough.
No, I'm just thinking I have not come across carriers that have really talked about, let's say, just have a price, right? Literally just a price. They still think in this surcharge structure where you have a freight rate, and then on top of that comes surcharges 10 to 50, whatever it is. Again, in my world, it would make more sense to just have one price and forget about everything else. But I have not come across it, so that's why it's at least not something I can say, hey, I think that's where we're going. It logically makes sense, but nobody has at least talked to me about it.
Okay. And I mean, coming back to the kind of subject of international cooperation between partners and so on, of course, if everybody has their rate management, there needs to be some kind of a way that these people exchange rates with each other or make them accessible to each other easily. Because today we still have a lot of emails floating around. If I look at our members, if they have inquiries with each other, it's a very long email trail that actually should be, or in some cases it's an online portal where you log in and get your partner's rates, and you still have this human interface in between. You don't have it directly in your system. You think there will be more harmonization between that you can easily hook up to your partners on it?
I think somebody will invent something smart there. But I think compared to some of the other industries, there are still so many players in the freight forwarding market, and so many, especially also of companies on the call here, that there are different rules in different countries, different, say, IT infrastructures. I still think that is more difficult simply because of how scattered our industry still is. So that's why I would say it. At some point, somebody probably invents something that works really, really smartly that I cannot think of. But today, I find it difficult to really do on a broad scale. You can do it in a select group, and so you can auto optimize it. But something that really goes across countries and whole, let's say, swaths of freight forwarders, I don't see at the moment.
Mm-hmm. But in this, I mean, we're clear that in this kind of business-to-business environment, this human-to-human interface for things like that makes little sense. Huh? You pull things out of a system in order to communicate with somebody else, who then puts it into another system, which is actually really not very efficient.
No, I agree.
Okay, Badri is coming with one more point here. Indian government had pointed it's concerned on the sudden increase of freight rates. Yeah, okay. There is again coming down to the freight rate question. Who will engage there or who will not? I mean, this is really a bit looking into the crystal ball, huh? What governments will do and whether somebody will involve or not.
But I think the only thing I can say there is just that talked to some of the shippers, right? If you went from paying $1,000 a container and you're now paying $10,000 a container, at some point somebody at the CEO level is saying, we need to change how we're manufacturing, how we're buying, how we're doing all this. And the moment that happens and you see changes, that's when I think the governments will start to step in and say, hey, this has gone far enough. But that will take time before that move happens. But somebody paying 10 times what they did in procurement costs is going to impact bottom lines at some point in time.
So the pain is not hard enough. We still have to get there.
It takes, as you said, quarter 4, 5, 6, whatever it may be. But at some point in time, then companies will make decisions based on this. And that is when the governments will say, no, we really like how things work.
Okay. No party will last forever. Let's see. Okay. Thank you very much, Christian. Was really a very insightful session. Thank you also everyone who participated and all of your questions and your attention. We will switch over. You just go back to the other side and click on the virtual cocktail hour, get a drink, and then the system is matching you up with other participants, and you can exchange a few views on this or also talk on other subjects. I'll see you in that session in a moment. Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you, everyone.